and welcome to a Mentor Loop Moments. My name is Heidi Holmes. I'm co-founder and COO of Mentor Loop. We're a platform that helps organisations build a culture of mentoring for their people or communities. So today I'm going to be having a moment with Nick Mehta. Nick is the CEO of Gainsight, the customer success company, a 5-time Forbes Cloud 100 recipient. He works with a team of 800 people who together have created the customer success category that's currently taking over the SaaS business model world. Nick has been named one of the top SaaS CEOs by the Software Report 3 years in a row and one of the top CEOs by Comparably in 2018. We'll be discussing how Nick has navigated his career over the years, the future of work in a post-COVID world, and the role mentoring has to play across these themes. Nick, welcome, and thank you for having a moment with me today on your walk.
I know, Heidi, it's so great to be here. And so for everyone watching, appreciate you joining this conversation. And yes, I'm on a walk in Palo Alto, California. So trying to stay healthy myself while we do this.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So here we are. I'm in lockdown in Melbourne, Australia, and you're out walking. So hopefully,
I know. I feel like I'm rubbing it in. That's not fair, but yeah, feeling it for you. Can't wait for you to be able to go anywhere you want to get someday soon.
Yeah, someday soon. It's coming. So look, let's jump straight into it. I wanted to run through a few questions today, just to deep dive in, I guess, to your career to date. And obviously, sort of interweaving mentoring into that, both at an individual level and, as a role of CEO of a global tech company, Gainsight. So, when I looked through your LinkedIn history, you've had a fascinating career, from founder, such as time in VC land, to now, obviously CEO of a global tech company. So when you think about how your career has progressed over the years, I mean, was it that you had a plan in place from the start? And were you always destined to be a leader?
I definitely don't believe in destiny. I think anyone can be a leader, and I believe in growth mindset for sure. But did I always want to do it? Well, I think there's actually, it's interesting enough, Heidi. Somehow, I 25 years later, somehow I still have in my Dropbox the essay I wrote to apply to college in 1993. It's a long time ago. Many of you watching weren't born then. And actually in that essay, I said I was going to be like, the essay was about what would you be 20 years from college? What do you want to be doing? And it was basically about me running a company. So running a company, I guess, was what I wanted to do, at least as per that essay. Now, the company I said I was going to run was this biotech company that was going to cure all world disease. Typical entitled high schooler, thinking I was so much better. I didn't think I was going to be running an enterprise software company. I don't think I knew what enterprise software was at 17 years old. But I guess I did want to be in business. The true part of that is, my dad was an entrepreneur. He never had anything big. He ran some small companies, but I kind of grew up around small business, and I think I just sort of probably got into it that way.
And I guess when you think about your pathway, especially, starting as a founder and going through now to, CEO of, you're CEO as a founder, you're CEO, COO, you're every C when you're a founder. But, how
totally.
would you describe yourself as a leader now? And what are some of the biggest challenges you've had to overcome in becoming that better version of yourself as you've grown into that role?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny because if I describe myself as a leader now, and I took that comment you made, better version of yourself, I actually would say for me, not necessarily better version of myself, but rather truer version of myself. So if you said, what's Nick's leadership style or whatever, the core of it is just literally having a lot of confidence in who I am and what I am, and just being completely comfortable being that and sharing that with the world, and not hiding it at all, being totally open to being vulnerable. But by the way, all the things that are, good, and some of the things that are challenging, and like being able to talk to anyone about it. So this like confidence in who I am and my style, and not seeing I need to be somebody else, right? So that's something that I think all of us end up trying to find. Now within that, what are the attributes? Well, if you ask people that know me, they'd say high energy and passionate, and big into communications, very positive, whatever. Like there's a lot of things, but all of those kind of touch on some core of like finding who I am, not trying to be better. Like I actually don't believe in that. Like there's no better. It's just like I know who I am, and I hopefully can be fortunate enough to have jobs where who I am is valuable to that job, right? And so I think I've figured out who I am.
But inevitably, I guess that continuous learning piece has to come into it.
Totally.
In developing. I mean, you know, what do you do? How do you keep yourself accountable around that personal development piece?
Well, yeah, I mean, so within that, like who I am doesn't have to be the same every day. I mean, you're totally right, Heidi. Like it's not like that's a static thing. In fact, just as a trivial thing, like I used to be like the worst dressed person in the room, and now I like spend a lot of time on fashion, right? Like you know, I'm so there's a lot of things that have changed about me. One of the ways I think about that from a work perspective is that I think about what the company needs right now, and like in my case, the CEO job description. Write the CEO job description. I wrote a blog post like a couple years ago that was pretty popular called "Attention CEOs, Fire Yourself." And the idea was once a year, every quarter, however often you want to do it. Imagine firing yourself, writing a job description for what the company needs then, and hiring that CEO. And then hopefully you can be that CEO or be that leader, right? Same thing apply for any job. And so for me, how's that played out? Well, you know, over time, I had to get better at like coaching executives versus doing things myself. I'm sure Heidi, you can relate to that. Or get better at long-term strategy versus just executing on what's there today. Being more thoughtful about decision making, including more people in the process. These are things you just learn. And so I have, like right now as an example, I have to figure out how to be a CEO of a company that has lots of different product lines versus we're just in one business, because we actually sell to customer success teams and product teams, and we have a bunch of different things we do. And so I have to I have to be that CEO. And so I talk to a lot of CEOs and say, how do you do these things? I actually met a CEO at a conference just 2 days ago, and just like learned his whole model. Like, how does he run it? How does he decide who works on what, right? So one of the things I try to do is I really try to learn from every single person I meet. It doesn't matter, by the way, if they're a super experienced CEO or their first time.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, we'll get to this a little bit later, but that's definitely that peer mentoring piece that's coming into play there. And, you know, there's such huge value in that, where you can talk to someone that's just, you know, in the trenches like you and going through some of the same experiences, you know, that can really be invaluable, that advice.
Right, exactly.
So changing tack here a little bit and taking it a little bit higher level, you know, addressing the elephant in the room. And I don't know if we're in a post-COVID world yet or still in a COVID world, but
still in it.
I'm very much still in it. But, you know, I think even pre-COVID, we heard a lot about, you know, the future of work and what is this going to look like? And, you know, the future of work is the future of work that. And we're hearing even more about the future of work now, you know, because everyone's in kind of this bit of a limbo land. Some people are back in the office. Some people are still working remote. We've got large, you know, tech giants like Atlassian coming out going, you know, we're remote first now. And we've got some people sort of grappling, you know, in the middle as well, you know, within this sort of trying to force people, you know, back as well, but a couple of days from home or whatever. And we're going to set on some sort of hybrid approach here, I think, for the majority of companies. I'm just keen, like, it's a big topic, but, you know, how do you think about this just, you know, I guess in the immediate short term and how you're navigating it, and what you think, you know, the future of work could look like for your people at Gainsight?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the right answer, because I can't say what the future of all work is. And there's going to be, just like the present of work, there's many different kinds of work, right? Like there's people that work in offices, they work in stores, they work at home. You know, I think there'll always be some mix. But for our company, I think one of the things I was talking about this at the same conference I alluded to before, where I do think each company has a potentially unique kind of ideal employee profile. You might have heard the term ideal customer profile, right? Yeah. That's like who you target. I think there's a similar thing of ideal employee profile. What employee is the type of employee that would be uniquely happy and successful in your company? And so I think that like a Gainsight story is that when we started, like we were actually distributed from the beginning. So we had people in India, people in the US throughout. And so we basically have always been very distributed. And one of the challenges there is obviously there's a lot of communication overhead, and a lot of video meetings and, time zones and all the things that you know all about. And then the upside is, even before the pandemic, we were a very flexible company. Need to go take time off to go see your kids' recital? No problem. Want to, spend the day with your spouse and catch up later? No, totally fine, right? And so we basically have leaned into that hardcore. I believe that like one of the really unique things Gainsight can do is be like one of the most flexible employers in the world, because we're essentially saying you can work wherever you want permanently. We'll probably have a few offices because there's some places people want to work in the office. But for me, I'm going to work from home forever. And that means all the meetings will be virtual and all that. And the advantage is that people on a walk, exactly. And the advantage is, and it's funny, even this walking thing, I tell everyone, hey, take walks, do calls while walking. Like I publish my step count every day to the company so they know that I'm taking care of myself too. When I go take time off because my kid has a birthday party, I tell everyone about that. And so I think that for us, our ideal employee profile is probably people that really value flexibility in like their whole life, right? But our ideal employee profile might not be somebody who is really early in their career, wants to be in an office with the energy of like 500 other people. That's a valid profile too. That's probably not going to be us, and we'll never be us. Like we'll never be great at that. And so I do think there's some element of like, what employee population can you be awesome for? And not trying to be something for everyone, but be great for a certain type of, for people looking for a certain type of company.
Yeah, it's interesting actually you say that, and you reference the younger, employee looking for that, that in-world experience of the office.
Yes.
And, I think that's actually something we've seen, in organizations coming to us. I think mentoring's often been seen as a bit of a nice to have, or it's something that's only relevant for high potentials. But they're in this limbo land of this, remote hybrid world. Some of their employees, they could be younger employees, but, a mid-career as well. A lot of people are going through a period where they're, remotely onboarding people and they've never done this before. And so, you've got tools like Zoom and Teams to, communicate, but people are almost becoming more siloed in a sense in that they're communicating, with their teams. How do you interact and meet with people outside your team? Essentially, how do you have those water cooler moments remotely? That's where we're starting to see mentoring come back as a way, kind of as an initiative to drive some of these connections outside of your specific team. So I guess when you think about yourself in working from home, and I guess Gainsight sort of leading with that remote first mentality, what are some of the initiatives you're doing internally as well to help create that sense of connection across teams?
Yeah, first of all, Heidi, you're totally right. And that connection is the operative word for sure. Because I think that is the one thing you lose when you don't sort of just see people in person, and you have to find ways to do it. And by the way, like, I love seeing people in person, right? I mean, it's awesome. Like, I would love to meet you in person, right? But, sometimes the circumstance doesn't allow it, and there's, it's a trade-off, right? And so I don't love being on the road every week. That's like, there's two sides to everything. And so I think that there's ways you can create connection that are never going to be the same, but they can still be very special, right? And so that's one of the big things I believe is remote's never going to be the same as in person, but it doesn't have to. It just needs to be good for certain kinds of people. So for me, one thing is in your company event, all hands that are virtual, really focus on connection. And so we were just talking about, like, for our all hands, like, the only purpose is connection. Because, everything else, the communication of information, what's happening at Mentor Loop or Gainsight, people find out about that 24/7. There's Slack, there's, email, whatever you're doing, right? So just point in, like, wasting precious time on actually, like, just communicating information. And so, for example, we've had, like, in our hands, we've had this awesome DJ come in, right? And the DJ comes in and puts on he's like a great DJ, by the way. His name is DJ Schematics. He's so good. And he puts on all these, like, awesome songs, and people on the Zoom chat are, like, having a lot of fun, right? And every meeting that we do at Gainsight, we have an icebreaker, every single one. What song is in your head right now? What's your childhood dream? What's your favorite memory from summer? Every meeting has an icebreaker. and people do it in Zoom chat, right? And so there's different ways to drive connection. I love the peer-to-peer mentoring idea, and like I love what you guys do. And by the way, we at Gainsight use MentorLoop for our community, which we can talk more about separately. So I love that idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's probably a nice segue, because I was going to bring that up. So we're obviously working with you to support CS Gainsight Community Mentoring Program. And, you know, it's funny because we're actually, again, seeing more and more companies sort of come to us and thinking about mentoring, not just as an internal sort of tool to create connection and connectivity, but as part of their social impact strategy. So yeah, I was wondering if you could just talk through a little bit more about the Gainsight CS Ops mentor program and what sort of drove that initiative from your side.
Yeah, totally. And let me say overall, my philosophy, like in general, is like today, most companies think of their company and their customers and kind of community as different things. I believe that concept is gone in the future. It's gone. It's all one thing. It's all just human beings, right? And actually, you know, you might have already experienced this at our size, Heidi. We have, you know, customers that became employees and employees that became customers, and like everything, every permutation, right? So to say it starts and stops here, it doesn't make any sense. So we've always been a very community-oriented company. And when we started, we created this community for the customer success profession called Pulse. And that was, you know, the big thing was this big conference that we do in person every year. And then obviously lots of other events. And what we found was, okay, those events are kind of like the office, where they just naturally, there's a lot of, you know, community building that happens in person, and it's great, right? It's really cool. And water cooler talk, as you said, right at the bar or whatever. But, you know, how do you replicate some of that online? And how do you create that serendipity? And we had a specific role within customer success called customer success operations. It's kind of like the new part of customer success. If you are familiar, if you're watching, from sales has sales operations to help you scale sales. This is the same thing for customer success. Everyone's hiring customer success operations people, but they're all kind of new to the job. And so for a lot of them, they're like, well, what's my job supposed to be like? And you know, one of the big things in community is people just want to feel less lonely, and they want to meet people like them, and they feel like they're not the only ones going through this. And what I love about MentorLoop is I've talked to so many of our people in our community that have used MentorLoop now to be paired up with a CS operations person that's a little further along in the journey, and they love it. They love it. And by the way, the people that are further along in the journey love being the mentor as well. I'm sure you hear this all the time, right? It's a two-way, it gives both people benefit, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I think, you know, that's kind of this old world view of mentoring that, you know, for a mentor, it's just about this altruistic view, that it's about giving back and, you know, feeling good about yourself. But it's way more than that. Like, I always have this moment when I'm playing that role of mentor that, you know, I'm giving, you know, a piece of advice or some guidance, and I think, oh, you know, I need to go and do that, you know, thing. Why aren't I doing that? Like,
I had that, Heidi, literally today. I had like an hour ago, a CEO was asking me like he's a smaller company. He said, what are your biggest learnings from, like, you know, when we were much smaller? And then I rattled off a list of things, including 3 or 4 things I still haven't done yet. So I really need to do these now. So yeah, you're totally right. I learn just as much as if not more, from every conversation. It doesn't even matter how experienced the person is. I meet some CEOs who are running tiny startups, and I learned tons from them, right? And so I think that, like, one of our values at Gainsight is Shoshin, which is the Japanese word for beginner's mind. And so beginner's mind, you know, the idea that we all can learn the most if we adopt the mindset of a beginner, right? Because beginner's mind, the possibilities are endless, right? So we love that.
Yeah, that's so funny. It sort of aligns back to, you know, a sentiment we have at MentorLoop, that no one is self-made. Like, there's always a support act involved, and you know, you never stop learning. So yeah, I guess just on a personal level, then, like, if you think about over the years, you know, we've had a chat about some peer mentors. I mean, but, you know, in terms of mentoring for you at a personal level, you know, who have been some of the most impactful mentors that you've connected with over the years?
That's very interesting, because, you know, the term mentor has 2 different definitions, like you alluded to, right? And whenever I hear the term outside of your company, I have that old school definition, which is, that one person that's the super wise person that's telling you everything and passing on to the next generation. And I never had that. Like, I never had one person. I kind of say I'm like a student of the world. I want to be mentored by everyone. And so if I go through some people that specifically have helped me, Jeremy Burton I was at a software company called Veritas. I was a product manager. Jeremy was the president of the company. And, you know, he was incredible at taking technical complex ideas and making them exciting, like in terms of marketing. And I learned so much from him. There's a guy named Mike Spicer who was another one, a boss of mine, and he was a director of product management or something, and he's now a big time venture capitalist. And he just talked to me so much about ambition and going for big ideas. I've learned so much from so many different people. And so this idea of like everyone can be a mentor and everyone can be mentored. That's why I like what you do, because it's like not this thing where you just do it once and there's one person. You want to be able to have access to everyone. So
yeah, and that's it. We have the kind of this slide that we use, which is this picture of Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook and Steve Jobs. This is how people typically see mentoring. That is this hierarchical kind of relationship, and I see something similar in you to me, and I'm going to take you under my wing. But the problem with that is that it excludes, that sort of mentality favors the bold. It favors people that already have these networks, and actually
that's right.
Makes mentoring for makes it feel like it's an inaccessible proposition. Yes. When in fact, I've always found that the best mentors that I've had, particularly as a founder early on, were just those people that were 12 or 18 months ahead. They can help you see around corners. They've just gone through something you're about to, that's where really, the nuggets of advice come from.
I'll actually give you a couple other examples just to build on what you said. So in my CEO role, Aaron Levy at Box, who's the CEO of Box, who's a well-known SaaS company, and it's been incredible. Not even like, by the way, not like him sitting and mentoring me, more like us just talking and like hearing how he thinks. And he's this incredible resilience to just keep going. Or I'll pick a name that's probably not as familiar. There's a woman named Rachel Carlson, who's the CEO of Guild Education. Guild is a company that's actually younger than Gainsight. And Rachel's younger than me, but I've learned so much from her because she's gotten to do her company even in an even more modern way than we did, because she only started, 5 years ago, right? And so, I totally agree with you. There's this thing about like people that are on your journey, maybe a little bit further ahead, maybe the same level, and you can learn so much from them.
Yeah, absolutely. So last sort of, I guess, just to wrap up around this mentoring piece at an individual level, I know from people in our community that they're often curious about how to go and connect with a mentor. And I'm sure you get approached all the time on LinkedIn. I'm curious just to know, when you are approached, how do you assess whether this is something you'll take on? I know you're very generous with your time, but you obviously can't mentor everyone. From a mentor's perspective, what advice would you give people, that are going out and seeking mentorship in how to approach someone?
That's interesting. One thing I would say is you probably don't start out with the message, "Can you mentor me?" Because that is it's a tough, it's sort of like on a first date proposing somebody to marry them. It's like, okay, you might want to save that for later. Exactly. So I do think it's like, it's, you can ask, for, 20 minutes of time to just get your input on something. I think that one thing to not undersell is to share, okay, what can you bring to the table too? So, it doesn't have to be positioned as a one-way street. If somebody emailed me and said, "Nick, I'm trying to, I'm a VP of customer success. I'm thinking about my next job. I'd love to get your advice, but I also love to give you feedback on what I'm hearing from, the needs of CS leaders in the market right now." Right. And so I'll be like, "Oh, wow, great. Like I learned something. They learned something. That's awesome." And so I think that type of like short conversation, build the relationship over time, two-way street. And then just like in marketing, you have that conversation. Now nurture that person. What I mean by that is like, you don't have to just ask for another meeting right away. You can, a month later, send that person that you met a note saying, "Hey, I really enjoyed our conversation. I saw this article and I thought of you," right? It's that like ongoing relationship building that takes work. I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's sort of this term around, funny you mentioned about think about what you can offer as well, because it is about, mentoring. We view it as the best mentorships are reciprocal in nature.
Totally.
And I think, it's also important for mentors to, come with an element of vulnerability to the table here as well.
Yes.
Because, that's obviously, there's something here for you to learn too. We've all got something to learn, we've all got something to teach, but, it shouldn't just be viewed as a one-sided relationship.
Love it. That's such a great way to say it.
Well, Nick, I think that's a wrap. I mean, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with me today, and on your walk. I'm so jealous of the sunshine and you being out and about, but it's given me energy for the day ahead. So I really enjoyed chatting with you, and we look forward to supporting Gainsight, mentoring initiatives going forward.
Thank you so much for inspiring people around mentorship, and thanks for being a great partner to us, and thanks for going on a walk with me. So really enjoyed it.